All right, so I am going to do a quick demonstration of how to create a pretty authentic looking screen printing texture and just how to do that digitally. A lot of it comes down to understanding how the screen printing process works. So you'll see what I've done here is I first created an example Illustrator file that I'm going to use to kind of build out this effect. I just want to point out the way that I've built this file because the way I've built the file aligns with how you would actually screen print a poster. So you're all learning that screen printing process in John's class. So I think the more hands-on experience you have with that, the more convincing you'll be able to mimic that process just digitally here. So I'm imagining that this poster or this piece of art that I'm creating is going to be a 3-color screen print. And so what that means is everything I create, any kind of highlights, shadows, all of that needs to just be done with one of 3 colors. So in Illustrator, I went ahead and separated out my artwork into 3 layers, and you can see that I have a red layer, a blue layer, a yellow layer. So each of these will align with that particular screen. So if I was going to actually burn a screen and then pull yellow ink through that screen, this is what the yellow layer would look like. Here's what the red layer would look like, and so on. So that's the first thing you want to do is actually do color separations in your original file and start to kind of visualize how each of the colors will interact with each other. So that's what I did first. And then if you're using dark colors, you can probably get away with just leaving them as the original color. But if you're using like a light color, like yellow, ultimately, even though I know in the end I'm going to print this yellow, for the next step in Photoshop, you might actually want to convert all your colors to to black. So you can see I just duplicated that yellow layer. So it's still labeled as yellow. I know that I'm ultimately going to fill this with yellow, but for the techniques we're going to use in Photoshop, it's probably going to be better if this is black. So from here, let's jump over into Photoshop. So what I've now done is I have pasted in all of my layers one at a time from Illustrator. And so you can see I have a little folder here to the right where I've organized my layers. And so these are all my original Illustrator files. And so yeah, pasted in my red, pasted in the blue here, pasted in the yellow. But as I said, I actually pasted in the yellow as black. So even though I'm going to fill this with yellow, once again, it's helpful for this to be black. So the way I'm going to recommend that you end up ultimately building your files is by using what are called color fill layers. And the fill layer is essentially going to act as the ink. So if you're screen printing this, this is like where you would fill the ink in, and then the mask for that ink is going to be like the screen that you would burn. So I've done a fair amount of screen printing, and this is how I build my files to screen print. And so what I ultimately do is the layer mask that I'm using for my fill layer, this is the artwork I literally use to burn my screens. So that way I know that what I'm seeing on Photoshop is going to perfectly match what I ultimately get whenever I screen print this for real. So the way that you can create a color fill layer is if you go down to your layers window and click on this little black and white circle and go up to the top and click solid color. So that'll create a new layer, and then you can assign that any color you want. The nice thing about that is later if you change your mind on colors, you can just double click on it and pick a different color. And so in that respect, it almost acts like a vector shape. So I like to use color fill layers a lot because they're very flexible in that way. But you can see whenever you add a color fill layer, it just fills in the entire image area, just solid. And so what you have to do is, if you want your artwork to be that color, if you hold Option and then click on the color fill layer mask. So again, I'm holding Option, that's really key. So I'm holding Option and then click on that layer. Now what I'm doing is I'm looking inside of that layer mask. And so if I start to paint some things here with a paintbrush, and now I click out of that layer mask, you can see anything I paint in that layer will then be represented in that color. So that's a real quick version of how these things work. So I'm just going to delete that layer, and you can see here that I have already pasted in my artwork into each of these layers. And so again, I have all my color separations built as separate layers here. And now what I want to do, so we're starting to get a little bit of this screen printing effect. It's not working perfectly yet, but we're kind of on track. So what I now want to do is actually create, because I have this ugly smooth gradient here, but I actually want to turn that into a halftone pattern. So in order to do that, I can select this whole layer, copy it, and this is going to be best to build a separate Photoshop file for each of your colors. So in this case, if I'm doing a 3-color print, I'll want to have 3 additional files, so one for each color. So this will be my yellow color layer, so I've already got it built, so I can paste my artwork into here, and now I can start to apply like some halftone effects to this. So I'm going to convert this from grayscale to bitmap, and that's okay. Keep my resolution the same. We're going to be jumping back and forth between this file and my other file, so I need to make sure that the pixel dimensions and the resolution are all match. And then for the method where I'm converting it to bitmap, use halftone screen, click OK. There's different shape options for what I'm doing. I'm going to go with round. You can change the angle, you can change the size of the frequency number is going to change the size of those dots. So I've already pre-tested this, so this is the effect that I want. So you can see I now have the halftone pattern that I was looking for. I'm actually realizing there's one tiny little adjustment I'm going to make here. I'm going to redo that. Okay. So again, converting this to bitmap and getting my halftone. From here, I'm actually going to jump back out of bitmap, back to grayscale. Bitmap is very limiting, so you can't apply any kind of filters or anything to it. I'm now going to hit this with just a few filters to give my type a slightly more organic edge. So I'm going to do that by going to filter gallery. I'm going to hit this with a glass ripple. You can see it just makes my edges a little bit funkier looking, makes everything have a slightly more imperfect look. This ocean ripple thing also works, but you just have to tone the filter down a whole lot. A lot of these filters in Photoshop, if you use the default settings, it'll make things look really crazy and kind of the effects are way too strong. So yeah, we can say that looks good. I can now copy this whole thing, go back into this, and then while in this layer, I can paste that into there. I can now do the same thing with each of my other layers. So I can now go into, what was this? This is my blue layer, is that right? So same thing, I'm going to now bitmap this. So I've got that halftone pattern. Sometimes you might need to make little color adjustments here. So again, I'm just going to apply just a little bit of kind of distortion to this. Another good filter that you can use, so I've already shown you glass, ocean ripple. Another good one is torn edges. Can give you some decent effects here. Again, you can just kind of play with those a little bit and kind of hone in on the exact amount of distortion that you want. Okay, so if I'm happy with that, you'll want to take more time. I'm just kind of rushing through this for the sake of the demo and try not to make this a demo that lasts forever. Okay, I decided to separate my shadow here from the rest of that blue layer. I'm going to ultimately combine those, but for now, you can see I kept them separate. Part of that is because I want this shadow to be blurrier, and I just thought it'd be easier to do this in Photoshop rather than creating it in Illustrator. So I'm just going to add like a Gaussian blur here so that my shadow has a little bit of kind of a softer, fuzzier edge. Okay, so copy that over. Again, you just kind of work in a new layer or in a new file. So go from here, go back, paste that in. So now I've got my shadow. Right. And then I can do the same with my red layer. I can find my red layer. Is that 3? Okay. This one I might even add some other little effects to it, just to make it feel like the ink isn't hitting perfectly everywhere. So I could actually, let's see here. Like I could add some grain or noise to the background a little bit. So you can see I can add a little bit of graininess to it. That will give a slight effect as though, rather than having like a perfectly pure kind of digital color field, it'll give it just a little bit of, like the ink didn't perfectly sit on the paper, and just give it all a little bit of texture. Okay, so I'm going to copy that over, go back to this layer, and then paste that in here. And so now let's start to see kind of what we're getting here. You can see that I got a little bit of that kind of grainy effect. I can certainly add that to all of my layers if I wanted to. So I can add noise, I can go back and add grain here too. Same thing. Add some noise. Add grain. You can add more noise. Customize this however you want. So it's a subtle effect, but it'll. Okay. So here you go. As I zoom in, you can see there's a little bit of kind of slight graininess to it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode of all these layers to multiply. And that will give me a little bit of, I'll show you what I'm going to do here. So, sorry, I didn't pre-bake all this stuff maybe the way I should have. Quick little tip here. If you hold Command and then click on your mask, it'll actually make a selection of your mask, and sometimes that's really useful. So, like for instance, my yellow disappeared when I converted it to multiply, so I'm going to go over to my red mask, and I'm actually going to just paint in this here for my yellow, and now you can see my yellow is now going to actually appear here because I just masked out the red. But we can now kind of create just, we can select individual things and, or sorry, individual portions of our artwork, and we can actually mess up the registration a little bit if you'd like to, give things a bit more of an organic quality. So I'm going to do the same thing here. It's not knocking out all of the outline type that I have. So if I kind of move my blue layer a little bit, out of the way, it makes that look like that's slightly out of registration. I can make this a multiply layer, make this a multiply. There you go. It's not perfect. I feel like I would want to keep messing with this quite a bit, but just so you can get kind of a quick sense of how some of this works, that will start to get you kind of in the ballpark. Let's see here. Other little things. So I might select that and delete that part of the shadow. Okay, well, good enough, right? I think for demonstration purposes, we could keep playing with this. I think we could do a better job with a little more time, but I don't want this to be an incredibly long demo. So there you go. A few tips for how to get some kind of screen printing effects, and that's all for now.